You're delusional if you think anyone would pay to watch you act. My cousin Derek said it with the kind of casual cruelty that only family can deliver, right there at the dinner table in front of everyone. Thanksgiving 2023, the Morrison family. Annual gathering at my grandmother's house in Riverside, California. 23 people crammed around mismatched tables, the smell of turkey and disappointment thick in the air. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I was sitting between my younger sister Claire and my uncle Robert, who owned a chain of auto repair shops and never let anyone forget it. Derek was across from me, fresh off his promotion to regional sales manager at some pharmaceutical company, wearing his success like a badge he'd pinned to his forehead. The conversation had started innocently enough. My Aunt Linda asked everyone what they were up to these days. Standard family small talk. When it got to me, I'd mentioned I was still pursuing acting, still auditioning, still working toward my dream of making it in Hollywood. That's when Derek struck. I mean, come on, Alex, he continued, cutting into his turkey with unnecessary force. You're 28 years old. Don't you think it's time to get a real job? Something stable? Something that actually pays the bills? My grandmother, Margaret Morrison, the family matriarch who'd raised 5 children and buried a husband, looked up from her plate. Her voice carried the weight of 8 decades when she spoke. Derek's got a point, sweetheart, she said, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Acting is a nice hobby, but it's not a career. Not for people like us. We're working people. We build things, fix things, sell things. We don't pretend to be other people for a living. The table went quiet, except for the sound of forks against plates. My father, Michael Morrison, nodded slowly like he'd been waiting years for someone else to say what he'd been thinking. My mother, Patricia, reached over and patted my hand in that way that felt more like sympathy than support. You've been at this for how long now? My older brother Jake asked. He was the golden child, the one who'd followed Dad into construction, and now owned his own contracting business. 7 years? 8? And what do you have to show for it? I opened my mouth to respond, but my cousin Jennifer beat me to it. I saw one of those commercials you were in, she said, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone delivering disappointing news. The one for that local mattress store? It was sweet. But Alex, honey, that's not really acting. That's just saying, lines someone wrote for you. My Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Listen, kid, I've got a spot open at the shop. Good benefits, steady pay, room for advancement. You could start Monday if you want. Learn a trade that actually matters. Or, my Aunt Sarah chimed in, my friend Rebecca works in HR at that big accounting firm downtown. She says they're always looking for people with decent communication skills for client relations. You could probably get an interview. The offers kept coming. Real jobs, practical jobs, jobs that would make them proud to talk about me at future family gatherings, jobs that would let me contribute to a 401k and buy a house and become the kind of person who fit at these tables without causing worried glances and uncomfortable silences. My sister Claire, the only one who'd ever really supported my dreams, looked like she wanted to say something. But she was fresh out of college herself, trying to make it as a graphic designer, and I could see her weighing whether defending me might turn the crosshairs on her next. Derek wasn't finished. I'm not trying to be mean, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But let's be realistic here. You're waiting tables at some diner in Van Nuys, living in a studio apartment that's probably smaller than my walk-in closet. And for what? So you can go to auditions where they tell you you're not what they're looking for? He leaned back in his chair, warming to his theme. I looked it up, Alex. Do you know what the statistics are for making it as an actor? Less than 2% of actors make enough money to live on. Less than 2%. And that's actors who actually get work. You know what the odds are of becoming a movie star? Basically 0. My mother sighed. We just worry about you, sweetheart. We want you to be happy, to be secure. This dream of yours, it's been going on for so long, and we just don't see any progress. Remember when you said you were going to be on TV by the time you were 25? Jake added with a laugh that wasn't entirely kind. That was 3 years ago. My father finally spoke up. He'd been the strong, silent type my whole life, working construction since he was 18, building the kind of solid, dependable life he thought everyone should want. Son, he said, and the word carried decades of disappointment. I raised you to be better than this, to be practical, to think about your future. You're chasing something that doesn't exist. It's time to come back to reality. The thing about family is that they know exactly where to aim. They've watched you grow up, seen your insecurities, memorized your weak spots. When they want to hurt you, they don't miss. Derek pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Look, I'm not making this up, he said, turning the screen toward me. I've got the Hollywood Reporter right here. It says the average actor makes less than $20,000 a year. 20,000, Alex. I will make that in 2 months. He scrolled some more. And here's an article about how streaming services are cutting back on content, how the writer's strike hurt everyone in the industry, how AI is going to replace actors anyway. You're trying to get on a sinking ship. My grandmother reached over and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, spotted with age, but her grip was firm. We love you, she said. But love means telling the truth, even when it hurts. You're a smart boy. You're charming. You're good-looking. You could do anything you put your mind to. But this acting thing? It's not working, sweetie. It's just not working. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. 23 pairs of eyes on me, all reflecting the same message. Give up. Be practical. Accept reality. Stop embarrassing yourself and us. My Uncle Robert tried to lighten the mood. Hey, you know what? Some of the greatest actors started late. What's that guy's name? Harrison Ford? He was a carpenter before he made it. Maybe that's what you need. Learn a real skill first, then if you want to keep auditioning on weekends, knock yourself out. But make sure you have something to fall back on, my Aunt Linda added. Something stable. Derek was still scrolling through his phone, reading statistics like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Oh, here's a good one. It says that 90% of actors are unemployed at any given time. 90%, Alex. Think about that. If you walked into a room with 10 actors, 9 of them would be out of work. And the ones who do work, Jennifer added. Most of them are doing dinner theater in Branson, Missouri, or dressing up as characters at kids' birthday parties. That's not exactly the glamorous life you're imagining. My father set down his fork and leaned forward. Look, I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes being a man means admitting when something isn't working and changing course. I wanted to be a professional baseball player when I was your age, though I had what it took. But after a while, you realize that wanting something doesn't make it possible. That's different, Dad, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the assault began. How is it different? Because you never really tried. You got married right out of high school and went straight to work. You never gave yourself the chance to find out if you could make it. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My father's jaw tightened, and I knew I'd crossed a line. Is that what you think? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That I gave up? That I took the easy way out? My mother put a warning hand on his arm, but he shook it off. Let me tell you something about the real world, son. The real world doesn't care about your dreams. The real world cares about whether you can pay your rent, whether you can support a family, whether you can contribute something meaningful to society. You think waiting tables and going to auditions is noble? You think it makes you special? He stood up, all 6 feet and 200 pounds of him, and I felt like I was 10 years old again. You know what's noble? Getting up every day and going to work, even when you don't want to. Building something that lasts. providing for the people who depend on you. That's what men do, Alex. They don't chase fantasies. My grandmother tried to intervene. Michael, sit down. This is Thanksgiving. But the dam had burst. No, Mom, this needs to be said. I've been watching this kid waste his life for years, and I'm tired of pretending it's okay. I'm tired of making excuses for him. I'm tired of lying to people when they ask what my son does for a living. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the kids at the other table had stopped talking. My cousin Derek looked like he regretted starting this whole thing. My sister Claire was staring at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. My father wasn't done. You want to know what I tell people when they ask about you? I tell them you're figuring things out. I tell them you're taking time to find yourself. But the truth is, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed that my son is nearly 30 years old and still acting like a teenager with a pipe dream. He sat back, down, but his voice carried across the table like a slap. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take Robert up on his offer. You're going to learn a trade. You're going to start acting like an adult. And if you want to keep pretending to be other people in your spare time, fine. But this fantasy about Hollywood is over. I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life. People who'd taught me to ride bikes and helped with homework and cheered at my high school graduation. People who loved me in their way, but who had just collectively decided that my dreams were worthless. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. This wasn't the time for texts or calls or anything else. This was the time to either fight back or surrender, to either defend my choices or accept their verdict. But something made me check it anyway. The caller ID said, David Chen, Paradigm Talent Agency. My heart stopped. David Chen, one of the most powerful agents in Hollywood. The man who represented A-listers, Oscar winners, the kind of actors whose names appeared above movie titles. I'd been trying to get a meeting with his assistant's assistant for 2 years. He was calling me. On Thanksgiving. At the exact moment my family was telling me to give up. I stared at the phone, and for just a second, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not defiance, but something quieter and more dangerous. Certainty. I looked up at 23 faces, all waiting for my response to my father's ultimatum, all expecting me to fold, to apologize, to finally see reason and join the family. Business of lowered expectations. Instead, I smiled. Excuse me, I said, standing up and holding my phone. I need to take this call. Derek snorted. Oh, let me guess. Your agent? I met his eyes across the table, my smile widening. Actually, yeah, it is. And I walked away from that table, away from their laughter and their disbelief and their certainty that they knew better than I did about my own life. I walked into my grandmother's backyard, past the rose bushes she'd been tending for 40 years, and I answered the call that was about to change everything, but they didn't know that yet. They were still sitting at that table, probably rolling their eyes and making jokes about my delusions of grandeur. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that the boy they'd just tried to break was actually the man who was about to break all their assumptions about what was possible. They had no idea that their loving intervention was about to become the most perfectly timed moment of irony in Morrison family history. But they were about to find out. Alex Morrison speaking. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with just a hint of excitement that made my pulse quicken. Alex? It's David Chen from Paradigm. I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday, but I have news that couldn't wait. I was standing in my grandmother's backyard, looking back at the warm yellow light spilling from the dining room windows. Through the glass, I could see my family still seated around the table, probably dissecting my dramatic exit and reinforcing their shared certainty that I was delusional, not interrupting at all, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Good. Listen, I'm going to cut straight to the chase because this is time-sensitive. Netflix just greenlit a limited series called The Prosecutor. It's their biggest legal drama since The Lincoln Lawyer, and they want you for the lead role. The world tilted sideways. I'm sorry, what? The lead, Alex. Not a supporting character, not a guest spot. The lead role in a 9-episode series with a budget that would make most feature films jealous. They're talking about a 2-season commitment, right out of the gate if the numbers hit their projections. I sat down hard on my grandmother's porch steps, my legs suddenly unreliable. David, I don't understand. I never auditioned for anything like that. I don't even have representation with your agency. He laughed, and there was genuine warmth in it. That's where it gets interesting. Do you remember that small, independent film you did about 18 months ago? Crossroads? Shot in downtown LA over 3 weeks? I remembered. It was a passion project by a film school graduate named Marcus Webb. No budget, no catering, no trailers. We shot in borrowed locations with equipment that looked like it came from a garage sale. I'd done it for free because I believed in the story and because Marcus reminded me of every dreamer who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. Marcus submitted it to the Sundance Film Festival, David continued. It didn't get in, but it caught the attention of a Netflix development executive who was on the selection committee. She watched your performance and flagged you in their system. When The Prosecutor came up for casting, your name was already on their radar. But that was over a year ago. The entertainment industry moves in mysterious ways, Alex. Sometimes things happen fast, sometimes they percolate. In your case, you've been percolating. The showrunner, Catherine Walsh, watched everything you've done. Every commercial, every small role, every student film. She told me, and I quote, "This guy has something special. He can do vulnerable and strong at the same time, which is exactly what we need for this character." Catherine Walsh. I knew that name. She'd created 2 of the most critically acclaimed dramas in television history. She was the kind of writer-producer who could make careers with a single phone call. There's more, David said. The role comes with a quote that would put you in SAG-AFTRA's top tier immediately. We're talking about enough money to change your life, Alex. Generational wealth territory if this thing hits the way they think it will. I was trying to process this information, but it felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. 18 months of silence, of wondering if that little independent film had been worth the 3 weeks of 20-hour days. And now this. I need to ask you something, David continued. And I want you to be honest with me. Are you ready for this? Because once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways you can't imagine. The anonymity you've been living with? That's over. The struggle? Over. But the pressure, the scrutiny, the expectations? That's just the beginning. Through the window, I could see Derek, gesturing animatedly, probably regaling the table with his theories about my psychological problems. My father was nodding along, and my mother was serving pie with the kind of determined cheerfulness she used when she was trying to smooth over family drama. They had no idea that everything they thought they knew about my life was wrong. For the past 3 years, while they'd been watching me wait tables and worry about rent, I'd been methodically building something they couldn't see. Not just taking acting classes, but studying with Larry Moss, the coach who'd worked with Helen Hunt, and Hilary Swank. Not just going to auditions, but building relationships with casting directors who remembered my work. Not just hoping for my big break, but creating opportunities through the network I'd been developing since I moved to Los Angeles. The independent film with Marcus wasn't a desperate grab at any role I could get. It was a strategic choice. I'd read the script and recognized something special in it, something that would showcase abilities I hadn't been able to demonstrate in commercial work. I'd turned down 3 paying gigs to do that film, a decision that had made my bank account weep, but my artistic soul sang. Alex? Are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. I'm just Processing. I understand. It's a lot. But I need an answer soon, because they want to announce the casting next week. Thanksgiving week, I know, but that's how this business works. Opportunity doesn't care about holidays. What David didn't know, what nobody knew except my acting coach and my closest friend in LA, was that I'd been preparing for exactly this moment for years. Not hoping for it, preparing for it. There's a difference. While my family saw me as someone who was failing at his dreams, I'd been succeeding in ways they couldn't measure. I'd booked 17 commercials in the past 2 years, enough to keep me afloat while I was selective about other projects. I'd done voice work for 3 animated series, building relationships with directors who worked across multiple platforms. I'd even done motion capture work for a video game that had won industry awards. None of it was glamorous. None of it was the kind of thing that would impress people at family dinners. But all of it was building towards something bigger, something I'd been working toward with the patience of someone who understood that sustainable careers aren't built overnight. The waiting tables job? That was part of the strategy too. It was flexible. It let me take auditions on short notice, and it kept me connected to real people instead of disappearing into the bubble that could trap actors who got too comfortable too quickly. Plus, the restaurant was in the heart of the entertainment district, and I'd served dinner to more industry professionals than most actors meet in a year. My studio apartment in Van Nuys wasn't a sign of failure. It was a choice. I could have gotten a larger place with roommates, but I'd wanted the solitude, the space to work on scripts and practice auditions without having to coordinate with other people's schedules. Every penny I saved on rent was money I could invest in my craft. "David," I said, finally finding my voice, "what exactly would this role involve?" "You'd play Assistant District Attorney Michael Brennan, a prosecutor who uncovers corruption that goes all the way to the top of the criminal justice system. It's a complex character, someone who has to navigate political pressure while staying true to his moral compass. The writing is sophisticated, the kind of material that gets Emmy attention. Emmy attention. I thought about my Uncle Robert's offer to work at his auto shop, about my family's collective certainty that I needed to abandon my unrealistic dreams and accept a practical life. "The shooting schedule would start in January," David continued. 6 months of principal photography, mostly in Los Angeles, but with some location work in Chicago and Washington, D.C. The time commitment is significant, but so is the payoff. If this show succeeds, you'll be set for the next decade. January was 2 months away. 2 months to go from being the family disappointment to being the lead actor in a major Netflix series. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. "There is one thing I should mention," David said, and his tone shifted slightly. "The network is going to want to do a deep dive into your background, social media, personal life, any potential scandals. It's standard procedure for a role this size, but I want you to be prepared. Is there anything in your past that might be problematic?" I almost laughed. The most scandalous thing about my life was that I'd been living it exactly the way I'd planned to, just without telling anyone about the plan. "Nothing problematic," I said. "I've been pretty focused on my work." "Good. That actually helps. They like actors who've been grinding, who understand the value of the opportunity. Too many people get handed success before they're ready for it." Through the window, I watched my sister Claire get up to help clear dishes. She was the only one who'd ever really believed in me, the only one who'd never suggested I should give up and find something more practical. Even she didn't know how close I'd actually come to making it. "Alex, I need to ask you directly. Are you interested in this role?" The question hung in the air between us. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd endured was condensed into this single moment. All those years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't practical enough, wasn't realistic enough about my chances. All those auditions where I'd gotten close but not quite close enough. All those commercials where I'd smiled and sold products I'd never use while I waited for something that would showcase what I could really do. All those nights lying awake in my studio apartment, wondering if my family was right, if I was delusional, if I should just give up and accept that some dreams don't come true. Yes, I said, and my voice was steady and sure. I'm very interested. Excellent. I'll set up a meeting for Monday morning. Catherine Walsh wants to sit down with you personally before we make this official. It's a formality at this point, but she likes to look people in the eye before she bets her show on them. Monday morning. 4 days from now. 4 days until my life changed completely. David, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been watching my work? There was a pause, and when he spoke again, there was something like respect in his voice. Longer than you might think. I've had my eye on you since that commercial you did for the insurance company about 2 years ago. The one where you played the young father worried about his family's future. Most actors would have played it for laughs or melodrama, but you found something real in it. Something honest. That's when I knew you had the goods. 2 years. He'd been watching my work for 2 years while my family had been counting the months since my supposed deadline for success had passed. The thing about this business, Alex, is that talent isn't enough. Persistence isn't enough. Luck isn't enough. You need all three, and you need them to align at exactly the right moment. Your moment is now. After we hung up, I sat on those porch steps for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands. Inside the house, I could hear the familiar sounds of my family's Thanksgiving tradition continuing without me. Dishes being cleared, coffee being made. My Uncle Robert probably telling the same stories he told every year about the early days of his business. They were good people, most of them. They loved me in their way. But they'd never understood that there was a difference between being a dreamer and being someone with a dream backed by a plan. For 3 years, while they'd been measuring my worth by their standards, I'd been building something by different rules entirely. While they'd been focused on the immediate practical concerns of making rent and building a traditional career, I'd been playing a longer game. Every choice I'd made, from the roles I'd taken to the roles I'd turned down, from the coaches I'd studied with to the relationships I'd cultivated, had been part of a strategy they couldn't see because they didn't understand the industry I was working in. The entertainment business doesn't operate like other industries. Success doesn't follow a predictable timeline. You can't climb a ladder, rung by rung like you can in construction or sales or auto repair. Sometimes you work for years in obscurity and then everything changes overnight. Sometimes the small choices you make end up being the most important ones. I looked back at the house, at the warm light and the family that had just spent an hour, telling me to give up on everything I'd been working toward. In a few hours, I'd drive back to my studio apartment in Van Nuys. I'd go to sleep in the same bed I'd been sleeping in for 2 years. I'd wake up in the same small space where I'd been learning lines and practicing scenes and preparing for opportunities they didn't believe would ever come. But everything had changed. On Monday morning, I'd sit across from Catherine Walsh and discuss bringing her character to life in a series that could define the next phase of my career. By Christmas, I'd be preparing to start work on a show that would put my face in millions of homes across the world, and my family, the people who loved me enough to stage an intervention about my unrealistic dreams, would finally understand that they'd never really known who I was at all. I stood up, brushed off my pants, and walked back toward the house. Through the window, I could see them all exactly where I'd left them, still processing my abrupt exit, still convinced they knew what was best for me. I opened the door and stepped back into the warmth and light of my grandmother's dining room, carrying a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about success, about dreams, and about me. But I wasn't ready to tell them yet. First, I wanted to savor this moment. The last few minutes of being underestimated by the people who'd raised me, because very soon, they were going to see exactly who Alex Morrison really was. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching my family settle back into their comfortable rhythms. The tension from our earlier confrontation had already begun to fade, replaced by the familiar cadence of post-dinner conversation. My grandmother was directing the cleanup effort with military precision. My mother was wrapping leftover turkey in foil, and the men had migrated to the living room where football highlights played on the television. Derek looked up when I entered, a smug expression still playing at the corners of his mouth. "So," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "was that your agent calling to tell you about your big break?" The question was designed to humiliate me, to underscore how ridiculous my exit had been. He was giving me an opportunity to admit I'd been dramatic, to laugh it off and rejoin the family consensus that my dreams were childish fantasies. Instead, I smiled. Actually, yes, it was. The room went quiet, not the tense quiet of our earlier confrontation, but something different. Uncertain. My cousin Jennifer paused in the middle of stacking plates, and my Uncle Robert looked up from his coffee with the expression of someone who wasn't sure if he'd heard correctly. Derek's smile faltered for just a moment before returning, broader and more condescending than before. Right. Of course it was. "Let me guess, you're going to be the next Ryan Gosling?" "Not Ryan Gosling," I said, still standing in the doorway, still smiling. "But Netflix seems to think I'd make a good lead actor in their new legal drama." The silence stretched longer this time. My sister Claire set down the dish towel she'd been holding and turned to face me fully. My father reached for the remote and muted the television. My grandmother was the first to speak. "Netflix," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not dismissal, not concern, but curiosity. "Netflix? The one on the computer?" "The same one, Grandma. They're launching a new series called The Prosecutor, and they want me to play the lead role." Derek let out a bark, of laughter that sounded forced. "Come on, Alex. We just spent an hour talking about how you need to face reality. This isn't helping your case." But I noticed he wasn't looking directly at me anymore. None of them were. There was something in my tone, my posture, my absolute calm that was making them recalculate. They'd expected me to come back defeated or defiant. They hadn't expected me to come back. My father cleared his throat. "Son, I know that phone call seemed important to you, but you need to be careful about getting your hopes up. These Hollywood people, they make promises they don't keep. They tell you what you want to hear." "You're right, Dad. They do sometimes. But this wasn't a promise. This was an offer." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, navigating to my email app. David Chen had sent a follow-up message while I was outside, and I showed the screen to my father. He took the phone reluctantly, squinting at the text. I watched his expression change as he read, watched the skepticism give way to confusion, then to something that might have been recognition. "Catherine Walsh," he said slowly. "Why do I know that name?" My mother looked over his shoulder at the screen. "She won all those awards," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For that show about the police detectives. What was it called?" "Blue Lines," I said. 3 Emmys, 2 Golden Globes, and a Peabody Award. She's creating this new show, my E. Father handed me back the phone, but he was looking at me differently now, like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "Is this real?" he asked. "It's real." Derek wasn't ready to surrender his position as family skeptic. "Okay, let's say it's real. Let's say this isn't some elaborate scam or misunderstanding. You still haven't actually gotten the part, right? This is just a meeting?" "It's more than a meeting," I said. "But you're right that nothing is final until contracts are signed." "Exactly." Derek leaned back in his chair, reasserting his earlier confidence. "So we're talking about maybe, a possibility. And meanwhile, you're still waiting tables and living in that tiny apartment and struggling to pay your bills." He was trying to reestablish the narrative, to bring the conversation back to familiar territory where my dreams were impractical and his advice was sound. But something had shifted in the room's dynamic. The other family members weren't nodding along with him anymore. My Uncle Robert was studying me with the appraising look he usually reserved for evaluating used cars. "Alex," he said carefully, "how long has this been in the works?" It was a good question, and a smart one. Robert had built his business from nothing, and he understood that opportunities like this didn't appear out of nowhere. "The groundwork has been building for about 2 years," I said. "But the specific opportunity came together in the last few weeks." "What kind of groundwork?" I could have given them a vague answer, something about auditions and networking that would satisfy their curiosity without challenging their assumptions. Instead, I decided to show them a glimpse of the world they'd never bothered to understand. "Do you remember that insurance commercial that ran during the Super Bowl 2 years ago? The one with the young father talking about protecting his family?" My mother nodded slowly. That was you?" "That was me. And the voice you've been hearing on those Honda commercials for the past 6 months? Also me. The motion capture work for the video game that won the Interactive Achievement Award last year? Me again." The room was completely quiet now except for the distant sound of my young cousins playing in the backyard. Even Derek had stopped trying to formulate his next objection. "The independent film that caught Netflix's attention was shot 18 months ago," I continued. "I turned down 3 paying jobs to do it because I believed in the script and the director. It didn't make any money, but it did exactly what I hoped it would do. It showcased abilities that commercial work doesn't allow for." My sister Claire was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Alex," she said softly, "why didn't you tell us about any of this?" It was the question I'd been expecting, and I'd been thinking about the answer during my time outside. How do you explain to people that their support had become conditional on your failure? How do you tell your family that their love felt safe only as long as you stayed small enough to fit their expectations? "Because you didn't want to hear it," I said, not unkindly, but directly. Every time I tried to talk about work, about projects I was excited about progress I was making, the conversation turned into advice about backup plans and realistic expectations. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We were trying to protect you." "I know. But protection can become a cage if you're not careful." My grandmother, who had been listening with the focused attention she brought to everything important, spoke up. "Show us the commercial," she said. "Grandma?" "The insurance commercial. The one you said was yours. I want to see it." I hesitated for a moment, then pulled out my phone again. The commercial was easy to find on YouTube. It had been viewed more than 2 million times. I handed the phone to my grandmother and watched as she held it close to her face, squinting at the small screen. The commercial played. 30 seconds of me sitting in a hospital waiting room, talking directly to the camera about the moment you realize that the people you love are more important than anything else in the world. It was simple, honest, and effective. When it ended, my grandmother looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "That's really you," she said. "That's really me." She passed the phone to my mother, who watched it with growing amazement. Then it went to my father, who watched it twice. By the time it reached Derek, the entire family dynamic had shifted. "This played during the Super Bowl?" my Uncle Robert asked. "During the pregame show," I clarified. "But yes, it was part of their Super Bowl advertising campaign." "How much do they pay for something like that?" I smiled, because I could see Robert's business mind engaging with the practical realities of my career in a way it never had before. "Enough to cover my expenses for several months." Derek was holding my phone but not watching the commercial. Instead, he was scrolling through the comments section, reading what viewers had written about the ad. "People really like this," he said, and there was something like surprise in his voice. "They do. Some of them are saying you should be in movies. Some of them are." He handed me back the phone, but he wasn't looking at me with the same confident superiority he'd worn all evening. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek looked uncertain. My Aunt Linda had been quiet through most of this exchange. but now she leaned forward. Alex, honey, I have to ask. If you've been doing all this work, making all this money, why do you still live the way you do? The small apartment, the restaurant job? It was another smart question, and I could see the curiosity behind it. They were trying to reconcile the success I was describing with the lifestyle they'd been judging. Because the work isn't steady, I said. Commercial work pays well when it comes, but it's unpredictable. I could book 3 jobs in a month or none for 6 months. The restaurant job provides baseline income and flexibility for auditions. And the apartment. I paused, thinking about how to explain this without sounding defensive. The apartment is affordable, which means I can take risks with my career. I can turn down work that doesn't serve my long-term goals. My father was nodding slowly, and I could see him processing this information through the lens of his own business experience. You're living below your means, he said. Keeping overhead low so you can weather the dry spells. Exactly. That's actually smart business practice. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. For the first time in years, my father was seeing my choices through a framework he understood and respected. My cousin Jennifer had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up. What about the Netflix thing? If you get this role, how does that change everything? If I get this role, I said, it changes everything. The money is substantial, but more importantly, it establishes me as a lead actor in television. It opens doors that have been closed to me. It validates the strategy I've been following. Derek was still struggling with the recalibration, still trying to find his footing in a conversation that had moved away from his expertise. But you said nothing is final, he insisted. You still have to get through this meeting, right? This could still fall through. He was right, and I could have acknowledged that uncertainty could have given him the opening he was looking for to re-establish doubt about my prospects. Instead, I made a choice that would either prove my confidence or expose me to even greater humiliation. Derek, I said, meeting his eyes directly, what would you bet me that this doesn't work out? The challenge hung in the air between us. It was a calculated risk, but I knew something Derek didn't. I knew that David Chen doesn't make calls like, the one I just received unless the deal is already essentially done. I knew that Catherine Walsh doesn't take meetings unless she's already decided she wants to work with someone. Most importantly, I knew that the scared, uncertain person Derek thought he was talking to had never actually existed. The man standing in this room had been methodically building a career while they'd been measuring him by their expectations. Derek looked around the room, realizing that the family audience he'd counted on for support was no longer automatically on his side. I'm not going to bet against my family, he said finally. No, I said, still smiling. But you've been betting against me all evening. The silence that followed was different from all the others. This wasn't uncertainty or discomfort. This was recognition. They were beginning to understand that the intervention they'd staged wasn't for someone who was failing to pursue his dreams. It was for someone whose dreams were about to come true, and they'd been too focused on their own fears to see it happening. My phone buzzed with another text from David Chen. I glanced at it, and my smile widened. What is it? My sister Claire asked. I looked around the room at these people who'd raised me, who'd loved me, who'd tried to save me from what they thought was inevitable disappointment. In a few seconds, I was going to show them just how wrong they'd been about everything. David wants to schedule a wardrobe fitting, I said. Apparently, Catherine Walsh likes to see how actors look in costume before she makes final decisions. The room erupted in questions, but I held up a hand. I think, I said, it might be time for me to tell you the whole story. I walked over to my grandmother's old china cabinet and pulled out the laptop she kept there for her online banking. The whole family watched as I opened it and waited for it to boot up, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What are you doing? My mother asked. I'm going to show you who I really am, I said, navigating to my professional website, because I think you deserve to know the truth about what I've been building while you've been worrying about my future. The laptop screen is filled with a clean, professional layout. At the top, in simple black letters, Alex Morrison, actor. Below that, a high-quality headshot I'd had taken 6 months earlier by the same photographer who shot portraits for A-list celebrities. My family gathered around the small screen, and I watched their expressions change as they took in what they were seeing. This wasn't the amateur headshot of someone playing at being an actor. This was the marketing material of someone who'd already arrived. "This is your website?" my sister Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my website." I clicked on the Work tab, and a grid of thumbnails appeared. Movie posters, commercial stills, screenshots from television shows, dozens of them representing 3 years of steady, professional work that they'd never known existed. My Uncle Robert leaned closer to the screen. "Northside Medical," he read from one of the thumbnails. "That's the hospital show my wife watches. You were on that?" "Recurring role as Dr. Stevens's brother," I said, clicking on the thumbnail to show a clip from the episode. 3 episodes. Last season. The clip played, showing me in a hospital room having an emotional conversation with the lead actress about our fictional father's treatment. The performance was nuanced, layered, nothing like the simple commercial work they'd seen before. When it ended, my grandmother spoke. "You're good," she said, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. "You're really good." I clicked on another thumbnail. This one showed me in a courtroom drama, playing a young lawyer defending a client accused of murder. The scene was intense, showcasing a range of acting skills that none of my family had ever seen me demonstrate. "How many of these have you done?" my father asked. 17 television appearances in the last 2 years, I said. Guest spots, recurring roles, one pilot that didn't get picked up but opened doors to other opportunities. Derek was standing behind the group, trying to see over shoulders. "If you've been on all these shows," he said, "why haven't we seen you?" "You have seen me," I said. "You just weren't paying attention." I clicked on a thumbnail that showed me in the background of a scene from a popular crime drama. "This episode aired 6 months ago," I said. "I played Detective Harris's partner in 3 scenes. You commented on Facebook that you'd watched it, Derek. You said the show was getting boring." Derek's face flushed red as he remembered. I could see him trying to recall the episode, trying to remember if he'd noticed me. "I didn't realize—" "No," I said, not unkindly. "You didn't. None of you did. And I understand why. You were looking for failure. So that's what you saw." I clicked on the press tab, and a collection of articles and reviews appeared. Most were small mentions in trade publications, but there were a few larger pieces. One headline read, "Rising Star, Alex Morrison's Steady Climb in Television." My mother leaned forward to read the article. "Morrison brings a quiet intensity to every role," she read aloud. "His ability to convey complex emotions with minimal dialogue suggests an actor ready for leading man status. Alex, this is a real review. In a real magazine." "The Hollywood Reporter," I said. "They profiled 12 actors to watch last year. I was number 7. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of my cousin Jennifer quietly crying. I looked at her concerned. "Jen? Are you okay?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Alex, I'm so sorry. We've been treating you like you were failing, and you've been succeeding this whole time." I clicked on another tab. Representation. The page showed the logos of 3 talent agencies, including Paradigm, along with contact information for agents and managers. "You have 3 agents?" my Uncle Robert asked. "Different representatives for different types of work," I explained. "David Chen at Paradigm handles my television and film work. Sarah Williams at CAA manages my commercial bookings, and Marcus, Gold at UTA represents me for voice work and digital content. My father was shaking his head slowly. Son, I don't understand. If you've had all this success, why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? It was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. How do you explain to people you love that their support has become a burden? That their concern had felt like condescension? Because every time I tried to share good news with you, you found a way to diminish it, I said. When I booked my first commercial, you told me not to quit my day job. When I got cast in that independent film, you said it wouldn't lead anywhere. When I started taking classes with Larry Moss, you said I was wasting money on expensive hobbies. I clicked on a video testimonial from Larry Moss himself, praising my dedication and natural ability. The family watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most respected acting coaches talked about my potential. So I stopped sharing. I continued. I stopped trying to get your approval or understanding. I focused on building my career according to industry standards, not family expectations. Derek was looking at the screen with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. But, the restaurant job, he said. You still work at that diner. I do, I said, because it serves my purposes. The owner is flexible about my schedule. The staff includes other actors who understand the business, and it keeps me connected to real people instead of getting lost in the Hollywood bubble mentality. I clicked on a photo gallery that showed me at various industry events, premieres, award shows, networking parties. In several photos, I was standing next to actors they would recognize from major films and television shows. That's... My mother started, then stopped. Is that Sandra Bullock? From the premiere of Ocean's 8, I said. I had a small role that ended up getting cut, but I was invited to the premiere anyway. Sandra was incredibly kind. She actually gave me some career advice that night. My grandmother was studying a photo of me at what looked like a formal dinner. Where was this taken? The Critics' Choice Awards after-party last year. I was nominated for a commercial I did for Apple. Nominated. For a commercial? My father asked. The advertising industry has its own awards, I explained. The work I did for Apple won for Best Performance in a Technology Commercial. The client specifically requested me for their follow-up campaign. I could see them trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the successful professional they were learning about with the struggling dreamer they thought they'd been talking to. My phone buzzed again. Another message from David Chen. I glanced at it and felt my heart rate increase. What is it? Claire asked. I looked around the room at my family, these people who'd spent the evening trying to save me from my delusions, and made a decision that would change everything between us forever. Catherine Walsh wants to meet tomorrow instead of Monday, I said. She's flying back to Los Angeles tonight because she's excited about moving forward. The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking. Derek finally spoke. Tomorrow is Friday. Tomorrow is Friday. The day after Thanksgiving. The day after Thanksgiving. My Uncle Robert, the businessman, understood the implications immediately. Alex, he said carefully. Entertainment executives don't change their schedules and fly across the country on Thanksgiving weekend unless they're very, very serious about making a deal. No, I said. They don't. I clicked on the final tab of my website, News. The most recent entry was dated just 3 hours earlier. It was a brief post announcing that I was in talks for a major television role with more details to follow. You updated your website from here? My mother asked. From the backyard, while I was on the phone with David. My father sat down heavily, in one of my grandmother's dining room chairs. Jesus, Alex. You're really doing it. You're really making it. I've already made it, Dad. This Netflix thing is just the next level. I pulled up another browser window and navigated to Netflix's official website. There, prominently featured on their Coming Soon page, was a promotional image for The Prosecutor. The tagline read, Justice isn't blind. It just doesn't want to see. This is real, my grandmother said, and for the first time all evening, she sounded her age. This is really real. I clicked on one more thing, my IMDb page, the Internet Movie Database listing that every actor in Hollywood has, showing every role, every credit, every project. Mine showed dozens of entries spanning 3 years, with more marked as in development and post-production. At the bottom of the page was my professional statistics. Number of projects, 47. Average rating, 7.8 out of 10. Industry ranking. Rising, Derek sat down next to my father. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "We had no idea," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "You had no idea." My cousin Jennifer was looking at a photo of me with the cast of a television show she watched regularly. "Alex," she said, "we've been such idiots." "You've been family," I said. "A family that loves me enough to worry about my future, even when you didn't understand what I was building." My phone rang. David Chen again. "I should take this," I said. The family watched as I answered, putting the call on speaker so they could hear. "Alex, I've got Catherine on the line. She wants to talk to you directly." A woman's voice came through the speaker, crisp and authoritative. "Alex, this is Catherine Walsh. I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday." "Not at all, Catherine. It's good to hear from you. I've been watching your reel all afternoon, and I have to tell you, I'm incredibly excited about the possibility of working together. Your performance in Crossroads was exactly what I've been looking for in this character. My family was listening to every word, their faces reflecting amazement, and something that might have been pride. The role of Michael Brennan requires someone who can be vulnerable and strong simultaneously, Catherine continued. Someone who can convey moral complexity without losing the audience's sympathy. Your work suggests you understand that balance. Instinctively. Thank you, I said. I'm very interested in exploring this character. Excellent. David tells me you're available to meet tomorrow. I know it's unusual timing, but I'm eager to sit down face to face and discuss our vision for the show. I'll be there. Perfect. David will send you the details. And Alex, bring your A-game. This is going to be the role that changes everything for you. After we hung up, the room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, my grandmother spoke. "Alex Morrison," she said, "I owe you an apology." "We all do," my father said quietly. I closed the laptop and looked around the room at my family. These people who'd known me my entire life but had never really seen me. These people who'd loved me enough to stage an intervention for a problem that didn't exist. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But I need you to understand something. Tomorrow, when I walk into that meeting, I'm not going to be the struggling actor you've been worried about. I'm going to be a professional with 3 years of steady work, industry connections, and the respect of people who matter in this business." I paused, making sure they understood. I was never failing at my dream. I was succeeding at it in ways you couldn't see because you were measuring my progress by the wrong standards. Derek looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen from him before. "Respect. Alex," he said, "I think you might be the smartest person in this family." I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of relief. Finally, they could see who I really was. Finally, they understood that the intervention they'd staged wasn't for someone whose dreams were about to collapse. It was for someone whose dreams were about to come true. Steer. Next 24 hours unfolded like dominoes falling in slow motion. By Friday morning, word had spread through the Morrison family network with the efficiency of a military communication system. My Aunt Sandra called my mother at 7 a.m. to ask if it was true that Alex was going to be on Netflix. My cousin Tommy texted me from college wanting to know if I could get him an internship in Hollywood. My second cousin Rachel, who I barely knew, Sent a friend request on Instagram with a message asking if I remembered her from family reunions. But the most telling response came from my Uncle Robert. He showed up at my apartment in Van Nuys at 8:30 in the morning, unannounced, carrying a box of donuts from the bakery near his shop, and wearing the expression of a man who needed to have a difficult conversation. "Can we talk?" he asked when I opened the door. I let him in, curious about what had driven him to make the 40-minute drive from Riverside to my neighborhood. He looked around my studio apartment with new eyes, taking in details he'd probably dismissed before as signs of failure. The space was small but organized, a fold-out desk where I worked on scripts, a bookshelf filled with acting technique manuals and industry publications, headshots stacked neatly on a side table, a small but high-quality camera set up for self-taping auditions. "It's not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something more desperate, I guess. This looks like an office." He was right. I'd designed the space to function as a home office that happened to have a bed in it, rather than a bedroom that happened to have work stuff scattered around. Robert sat down in my single chair and opened the box of donuts. "Alex, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation." He selected a glazed donut but didn't eat it, just held it while he gathered his thoughts. "When I was your age, I wanted to be a musician. I had a band, wrote songs, thought I was going to make it big. Played at every dive bar in Southern California for 3 years. This was news to me. In 30 years of family gatherings, I'd never heard Uncle Robert mention anything about music. What happened? Life happened. Got my girlfriend pregnant, needed steady income, took a job at an auto shop to pay the bills. Told myself it was temporary, just until I could get back to music." He finally took a bite of the donut. 25 years later, I own 3 shops and haven't picked up a guitar in a decade. I'm successful by any reasonable measure, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stuck with it just a little longer. I poured coffee for both of us, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "When I see you chasing acting," he continued, "part of me sees myself at 25, convinced that talent and determination were enough. Part of me wants to save you from the disappointment I went through. But you didn't really fail, Uncle. Robert, you pivoted. You built something successful." "I did, but I never found out if I could have made it in music, and that uncertainty has been eating at me for 25 years. He set down his coffee and looked directly at me. "Last night, watching you show us your website, your work, your success, I realized I've been projecting my own regrets onto your situation. You're not me at 25. You're not failing at your dream. You're succeeding at it. Thank you for saying that. There's more." He pulled out his phone and showed me a text conversation. "I called my old bandmate Charlie this morning. Turns out he's been following the local music scene all these years. He told me about 3 guys from our old crowd who kept playing, kept grinding. 2 of them are making decent living as session musicians. One of them just signed a publishing deal." The weight of that revelation hung between us. "They made it," I said. "They made it. Not rock star famous, but professional musicians with sustainable careers. If I'd stuck with it, if I'd been more strategic about it." He trailed off, but I could see him processing decades of what-if scenarios. "Alex, I don't want to be the person who talks someone out of their dream because I gave up on mine. I want to be the person who learns from his mistakes." My phone rang before I could respond. "David Chen." "Alex, I hope you're ready for today. Catherine is already at the studio, and she's brought the full creative team. This isn't just a meet and greet anymore. They want to do a table read of key scenes." My Uncle Robert was watching my face as I processed this information. That's faster than I expected," I said. "When Catherine Walsh gets excited about something, she moves fast. Are you prepared?" I looked around my apartment at the scripts I'd been studying, at the research materials I'd compiled about the legal system and prosecutorial work. I'm prepared. Good, because if this goes well today, we'll be announcing the casting on Monday. They want to get ahead of the news cycle. After I hung up, Robert was still studying me. You really are ready for this, aren't you? I've been ready for 3 years. I just needed the right opportunity. He stood up to leave, but paused at the door. Alex, I have a favor to ask. What's that? When you make it big, and I mean when, not if, will you remember those of us who took too long to believe in you? The question caught me off guard, not because it was presumptuous, but because it was vulnerable in a way I'd never seen from Uncle Robert. Your family, I said. That doesn't change. He nodded and left, but I could tell something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. By 10 a.m., my phone was buzzing constantly. Word about the Netflix meeting had spread beyond family. My acting coach, Larry Moss, called to offer last-minute advice. My commercial agent, Sarah Williams, wanted to discuss how this opportunity might affect my other bookings. 3 former classmates from acting school reached out to congratulate me and subtly inquire about whether there might be other roles available. But the most surprising call came from Marcus Webb, the director of the independent film that had started this whole chain of events. Alex, I just heard from a friend at Netflix. They're saying Catherine Walsh is personally overseeing your casting. Do you understand what that means? Enlighten me. It means she's not just hiring you for this role, she's building a long-term relationship. Catherine doesn't work with actors she doesn't believe can carry multiple projects. Marcus sounded more excited than I felt, which was saying something. This is going to change everything for you, but it's also going to change things for everyone. Who's worked with you? That little film we made? Netflix is going to want to license it as part of your backstory. I've already gotten 3 calls this morning. The ripple effects were spreading faster than I could track them. At 11:30, I was getting dressed for the meeting when my sister Claire called. Alex, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Her tone was serious in a way that made me pause. I'm listening. Last night, after you left, Derek broke down. Not just embarrassed or apologetic. He actually cried. This was definitely not what I'd expected to hear. He said he's been watching you for years, waiting for you to fail so he could feel better about his own choices. He said every time you didn't give up, it reminded him of dreams he'd abandoned. I sat down on my bed, trying to process this information. Claire, I don't know what you want me to do with that. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you because I think you should understand that last night wasn't really about you. It was about all of us confronting our own fears and limitations. She paused, and I could hear her gathering courage for whatever she wanted to say next. Alex, I'm proud of you, but I'm also scared. Scared of what? Scared that success is going to change you. Scared that you're going to become one of those Hollywood people who forgets where they came from. Scared that we hurt you so badly last night that you'll never really trust us again. The honesty in her voice was heartbreaking and clarifying at the same time. Claire, success doesn't change people. It reveals them. If I become someone you don't recognize, it's because that person was always there, just waiting for the right circumstances. And who is that person? I thought about the question while I adjusted my tie in the mirror. Someone who remembers that talent without strategy is just an expensive hobby. Someone who understands that dreams without deadlines are just wishes. Someone who's learned that the people who doubt you aren't necessarily wrong, they're just measuring you by the wrong metrics. And someone who forgives his family for being human? Especially that. At 12:15, I was walking into the Netflix offices in Hollywood, and everything felt different. Not just because of the opportunity, but because of the clarity that had emerged from the previous 24 hours. For 3 years, I'd been building a career while carrying the weight of my family's doubts and concerns. I'd internalized their fears, their practical limitations, their measurements of success. Even as I was succeeding professionally, part of me had been defending against their version of reality. Now, suddenly, that weight was gone. They knew who I really was. They understood what I'd been building. They could see that their intervention hadn't been necessary because their assumption about my situation had been completely wrong. But more than that, I could see that their doubts hadn't been about me at all. They'd been about themselves, their own abandoned dreams, their own fears about taking risks and pursuing uncertain paths. Derek's confession through Claire had illuminated something I'd never fully understood. The people who are quickest to advise you to be practical are often the ones who regret being practical themselves. The people who warn you about the dangers of chasing dreams are often the ones who gave up on their own dreams and need to believe that giving up was the smart choice. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Break a leg today, son. We're all proud of you." It was the first time he'd ever used theater terminology in a message to me. Small detail, but it felt significant. I walked into that building carrying 3 years of strategic preparation, industry relationships, and professional experience, but I was also carrying something new. The knowledge that I'd been right to trust my instincts, right to pursue my path, right to believe in my ability to build something meaningful. The family intervention that was supposed to save me from my delusions had ended up saving me from their limitations. And as I took the elevator up to Catherine Walsh's office, I realized that the most important consequence of the previous 24 hours wasn't that my family finally understood my success. It was that I finally understood their fears had never been about me at all. They'd been projecting their own relationship with risk, with dreams, with the gap between what they'd wanted and what they'd settled for. Now I was free to succeed without carrying their doubts. Now I was free to build the career I'd been working toward without apologizing for it or defending it or making it smaller to fit their comfort level. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into the rest of my life. But first, I had a meeting to nail. The Netflix offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Hollywood, all glass and steel and the kind of modern design that suggested serious money and serious intentions. I'd been in smaller production offices before, cramped spaces with outdated equipment and the desperate energy of people trying to make something happen with no resources. This was different. This success was manifested in marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. David Chen met me in the lobby, looking every inch the powerful agent in his perfectly tailored suit and understated confidence. "Ready for this?" he asked as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "I've been ready for 3 years." Good answer. Catherine appreciates honesty, but she respects preparation more. The elevator opened into a reception area that looked like it belonged in a high-end hotel. Contemporary art on the walls, fresh flowers on the reception desk, and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's cars. "Mr. Morrison?" The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a genuinely warm smile, looked up from her computer. "Ms. Walsh is expecting you. Conference room 3. As we walked down the hallway, David briefed me on what to expect. There will be 5 people in the room. Catherine, obviously. Marcus Thompson, the showrunner. Rebecca Liu, the head of drama development. James Rodriguez, the casting director. And Sarah Kim, the executive producer. That's a lot of decision makers for a first meeting. That's how you know they're serious. When Catherine brings the full HR team, it means she's not just interested in you for this role. She's thinking about you as a long-term collaborator. We stopped outside a conference room with glass walls that offered a view of the entire Los Angeles basin stretching toward the ocean. Inside, 5 people were seated around a polished wooden table that probably cost more than my car. Catherine Walsh was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'4", with silver hair and the kind of intense focus that made you understand how she'd created 2 of television's most critically acclaimed dramas. She stood when we entered, extending a firm handshake. "Alex Morrison. I'm Catherine Walsh. Thank you for coming in on such short notice. Thank you for making the time. Please sit. I'll make the introductions and then we'll get right to it." The other 4 people around the table represented decades of experience in television production. As Catherine introduced each of them, I could feel them evaluating me, trying to determine if I was ready for the responsibility they were considering placing on my shoulders. "Before we begin," Catherine said, "I want you to know that we've done our research. We've spoken to Larry Moss about your training. We've talked to 3 directors you've worked with. We've reviewed every piece of work you've done in the last 3 years." She slid a folder across the table to me. "This is what we found." I opened the folder to discover what looked like a comprehensive dossier on my career. Screenshots from every commercial, reviews of my television appearances, testimonials from industry professionals I'd worked with. It was more thorough than my own resume. "Impressive homework," I said. "We don't take chances with roles this size," Marcus Thompson, the showrunner, interjected. "The success of this series depends entirely on finding the right person to play. Michael Brennan, someone who can carry 9 episodes and potentially 18 if we get picked up for a second season." Rebecca Liu, the head of drama development, leaned forward. "Alex, can you tell us why you want this role?" It was a standard question, but I could tell they were looking for something specific in my answer. Not enthusiasm, not gratitude, but understanding. "Michael Brennan is a character caught between idealism and pragmatism," I said. "He believes in justice, but he's operating within a system that doesn't always support justice. The tension between what he wants to do and what he's able to do is what makes the character interesting." Catherine nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. Too many actors would play him as either a crusader or a cynic. We need someone who can hold both truths simultaneously." James Rodriguez, the casting director, spoke up. "We'd like to do a table read of 3 key scenes. Are you comfortable with that?" "Absolutely." For the next hour, we worked through scenes that would define the character's arc across the first season. A courtroom confrontation with a defense attorney. A private moment where Michael questions his own methods. A tense conversation with his superior about political pressure. As we read, I could feel something shifting in the room. The evaluation period was ending, and something like collaboration was beginning. Catherine was making notes, but her body language suggested approval rather than concern. Marcus was nodding at line deliveries that worked particularly well. When we finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Alex," Catherine said finally, "I'm going to be direct with you. We want you for this role. The question is whether you want us." The statement hung in the air, loaded with implications. This wasn't just about booking a job. This was about stepping into a different level of professional responsibility. "Can you tell me about the long-term vision for the series?" I asked. Sarah, Kim, the executive producer, answered, "If the show succeeds, we're looking at a minimum 3-season commitment. The character arc we've planned for Michael Brennan spans multiple years and significant personal growth. We're not interested in casting someone who sees this as a stepping stone to something else. And if it doesn't succeed, then you'll have been the lead actor in a Netflix original series," Rebecca Liu said with a slight smile. "That's not a bad fallback position." Catherine stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. "Alex, can I ask you about your family?" The question surprised me. "My family? David mentioned you were with them yesterday when he called. How do they feel about your career?" I thought about the dinner table confrontation, about the intervention that had turned into a revelation, about Uncle Robert's visit that morning. "They're learning to understand it," I said honestly. "Good, because this business is hard on relationships. The irregular schedule, the travel, the public attention. You'll need people in your life who support what you're doing, even when it's difficult for them." She turned back to face the table. "We've made our decision. David will have the contract details by Monday morning. The question is, are you ready to say yes?" I looked around the table at these 5 people who represented everything I'd been working toward for 3 years. Not just the role, but recognition from industry professionals who understood what good work looked like. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Catherine smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. Excellent. Welcome to the prosecutor, Alex. I think you're going to do extraordinary work. As David and I left the building an hour later, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Word was spreading through the industry with the speed that only good news achieves in Hollywood. How does it feel? David asked as we stood on the sidewalk outside the Netflix building. Surreal. 3 days ago, my family was telling me to give up acting and get a real job. Now I'm the lead actor in a major Netflix series. That's Hollywood timing for you. Nothing happens for years, then everything happens at once. My phone rang. Larry Moss. Alex, I just heard from Catherine Walsh's office. Congratulations. I'm incredibly proud of you. Thank you, Larry. Your coaching made this possible. Your talent made this possible. My coaching just helped you access it more effectively. After I hung up, David handed me a folder. Your homework for the weekend. Character background, series Bible, scripts for the first 3 episodes. Rehearsals. Start next week. I opened the folder and saw the cover page. The prosecutor, character study, Michael Brennan, Alex Morrison. Seeing my name printed there, officially attached to the role, made it real in a way the meeting hadn't. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? There are hundreds of actors in this city with more experience, more recognition. Why did they choose me? He thought about the question while we walked toward his car. Because you understand. Something that a lot of actors your age don't understand. You know the difference between being discovered and being ready to be discovered. Meaning? Meaning you've been building a career, not waiting for a career to happen to you. When opportunity came, you had the skills, the experience, and the professionalism to seize it. That's rarer than you might think. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment with the scripts spread across my small desk, beginning the process of understanding Michael Brennan from the inside out. But part of my mind was still processing the whirlwind of the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, I'd been the family failure, the dreamer who needed to face reality. Now I was a Netflix series lead with a guaranteed income for the next 3 years and the kind of professional recognition that could define a career. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, though. It had been building for 3 years through dozens of small choices, incremental progress, and strategic patience. The meeting at Netflix was just the moment when all that preparation became visible to people who hadn't been paying attention. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Claire. Just saw the announcement on Variety's website. Alex Morrison, cast as lead in Netflix legal drama. I'm crying in my office. So proud of you. Then another from Uncle Robert. Heard the news on the radio driving home from work. They said you're the next big thing on television. I always knew it. Then my father. Son, I don't understand this business, but I understand success when I see it. Congratulations. Even Derek sent a message. Alex, I owe you a beer and an apology. Maybe you can teach me something about not giving up. But the message that meant the most came from my grandmother. Alex, dear, I'm proud of you for following your dream, but I'm proud of you for having a plan. As I read through the scripts, I realized that Catherine Walsh had created something special. The writing was sophisticated, layered, the kind of material that would challenge me as an actor while entertaining audiences. Michael Brennan was a complex character with real flaws and genuine moral struggles. This wasn't just a job. This was the kind of role that could establish me as a serious actor, the kind of project that might lead to award nominations and feature film opportunities. But more than that, it was validation of every choice I'd made over the past 3 years. Every commercial I'd booked to pay the bills, every acting class I'd invested in, every audition I'd prepared for with professional thoroughness, every relationship I'd built within the industry. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, Michael Brennan, Character Development Notes. Then I began the work of bringing Catherine Walsh's vision to life, the work I'd been preparing for since I first decided that acting wasn't just something I wanted to do, but something I was going to master. Outside my window, Los Angeles stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of dreamers and strivers and people trying to make it in an industry that chewed up most of the people who attempted it. But I wasn't most people. I was Alex Morrison, lead actor in a Netflix original series, and I had work to do. The family who'd tried to save me from my unrealistic dreams would have to get used to a new reality. Their dreams for me had been far too small. I was building something bigger than any of us had imagined. 6 months later, I was standing on stage 16 at Sunset Gower Studios, wearing the navy blue suit that had become Michael Brennan's signature look, preparing to film the final scene of episode 9. The season finale of The Prosecutor, that would either secure our second season or conclude the story Catherine Walsh had spent 2 years developing. The transformation of my life since that Thanksgiving dinner had been so complete that sometimes I felt like I was living in someone else's biography. The studio apartment in Van Nuys had been replaced by a 2-bedroom house in the Hollywood Hills with a view of the city where I'd struggled for so long. The restaurant job was a memory, replaced by a professional routine that revolved around scripts, rehearsals, and the kind of creative collaboration I'd dreamed about, but never quite believed I'd experience. But the most profound change wasn't in my circumstances. It was in how I understood my own story. For 3 years, I'd been building a career while carrying the psychological weight of my family's doubts and concerns. Even as I was succeeding professionally, part of me had been defending against their version of reality, trying to prove that their practical advice was wrong and their fears were unfounded. That Thanksgiving confrontation had burned away all of that. Not just because they finally understood what I'd been building, but because I finally understood that their doubts had never really been about me. They'd been about their own relationship with risk, with dreams, with the gap between what they'd wanted and what they'd settled for. The freedom that came from that realization had been as important to my success as any acting technique or industry. Connection. "Alex, we're ready for you," called Jessica Martinez, our first assistant director. She'd become a friend over the months of production, one of those industry professionals who made the difference between a job and a calling. The scene we were about to film was one Catherine had written specifically after watching my work in the early episodes. Michael Brennan delivers a closing argument that would define not just the case, but his character's entire moral arc. It was the kind of scene actors dream about. 6 minutes of uninterrupted dialogue that required emotional range, intellectual precision, and the ability to hold an audience's attention through pure performance. "How are you feeling?" Catherine asked as I took my place behind the prosecutor's table. She'd been on set for every major scene, a hands-on creator who trusted her actors but maintained creative control of every element. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The courtroom set was perfect in every detail, designed by a production team that understood that authenticity served the story. Real wood paneling, proper lighting, the kind of environment that helped actors disappear into their characters. "Quiet. On set," Jessica called. "Rolling." For the next 6 minutes, I became Michael Brennan completely. The months of character development, the research into prosecutorial practice, the emotional preparation for this specific moment all converged into a performance that felt less like acting and more like channeling. When Catherine called cut, the set was silent for a moment. Then the crew began to applaud, which almost never happened during television production. "That's a wrap on season 1, Catherine announced, and suddenly the set erupted in celebration. Months of 12-hour days, creative challenges, and collaborative problem-solving had led to this moment. But for me, the real significance wasn't the end of filming. It was the knowledge that we'd created something worth watching, something that would justify the faith Catherine had placed in me and the opportunity Netflix had provided. That evening, the cast and crew gathered for the wrap party at a restaurant in West Hollywood. The entire experience felt surreal, sitting at a table with people who'd become colleagues and friends, talking about the work we'd done and the work we hoped to do next. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. Early buzz from Netflix is exceptional. They're already talking about season 2 pickup and potential Emmy consideration. Your life is about to change again. I showed the message to Catherine, who was sitting across from me. Are you ready for that? She asked. The recognition? The awards attention? The opportunities that are going to start coming your way? I think so. But I've learned not to assume I know what ready looks like. She laughed. Smart answer. The entertainment industry has a way of surprising people, even when they think they understand it. My phone rang. My father. Alex, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just the wrap party, Dad. What's up? I wanted to call because I saw an article in the Los Angeles Times today about you and the show, the article he was referring to had run that morning, From Unknown to Leading Man, the Alex Morrison story. It was a profile piece that traced my path from waiting tables to Netflix star, including quotes from industry professionals about my work ethic and natural ability. What did you think? I think I owe you more than an apology, son. I think I owe you an acknowledgement. I stepped away from the party noise to hear him better. What kind of acknowledgement? That you were right and I was wrong. Not just about your chances of success, but about what success looks like in your industry. I was measuring your progress by construction industry standards, and that was unfair and ignorant. His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before, the tone of a man admitting a fundamental error in judgment. Dad, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Because that article made me realize something. You weren't struggling for 3 years. You were building something I didn't understand. You weren't failing to get a real job. You were succeeding at a real job that operates by different rules than the ones I know. I could hear my mother in the background, encouraging him to continue. The article quoted your acting coach, your commercial agent, 3 directors you've worked with. They all said the same thing. You're a professional who approaches this work with the same dedication other people bring to law or medicine or business. That's how I've always seen it. I know, and I should have seen it too. I should have asked more questions about what you were doing instead of assuming I already knew. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Alex, I'm proud of you, not just because you succeeded, but because you had the courage to pursue something I didn't understand and the wisdom to do it strategically. Thank you for saying that. There's something else. Your Uncle Robert and I have been talking. We want to invest in your production company. My what? The article mentioned that you're starting a production company with Catherine Walsh. Robert thinks it's a smart business move, and he wants to be an early investor. So do I. I hadn't expected this conversation to take this direction. Dad, you don't have to. We want to. Not because you're family, though that's part of it. Because we believe in what you're building. Because we've finally learned to see the entertainment industry as a legitimate business instead of a fantasy. After we hung up, I returned to the party with a new understanding of how completely the dynamics had shifted. My family wasn't just accepting my success. They were wanting to participate in it as business partners. Catherine noticed my expression when I sat back down. Good news? Complicated news. My family wants to invest in our production company. That's wonderful. Family money is often the most patient money. They're not looking for quick returns. It's just strange. 6 months ago, they were staging an intervention to convince me to give up acting. Now they want to be business partners. People change when they understand something they didn't understand before, she said. The question is whether you can forgive them for taking so long to get there. It was a good question, and one I'd been thinking about for months. 2 weeks later, The Prosecutor premiered on Netflix. The reviews were exceptional, with particular praise for my performance as Michael Brennan. The New York Times called it a star-making turn that announces the arrival of a major new talent. The Hollywood Reporter wrote that Morrison brings depth and authenticity to a character that could have been a cliché in less capable hands. But the review that meant the most to me was posted on my grandmother's Facebook page. My grandson Alex Morrison stars in a new show on Netflix. I don't understand computers very well, but I understand good acting when I see it. I'm proud of him for following his dream and for having a plan. The premiere party was held at the TCL Chinese Theater, the kind of Hollywood event I'd watched from the outside for years. Walking down the red carpet, answering questions from entertainment reporters, posing for photographs with Catherine and the rest of the cast. It felt like the culmination of everything I'd been working toward. My family attended the premiere as my guests, watching them navigate the Hollywood environment, trying to process the scope of what I'd built, was fascinating and touching in equal measure. Uncle Robert spent most of the evening talking to other investors about entertainment industry opportunities. Derek, who'd become one of my strongest supporters, was networking with production assistants and asking intelligent questions about the business side of television. But the moment that defined the evening for me came during the after-party. I was talking to a group of entertainment executives when I saw my father standing alone near the bar, looking slightly overwhelmed by the crowd and noise. I excused myself and walked over to him. "How are you holding up, Dad?" "It's a lot to take in," he said. "All these people, all this energy. It's like a different world." It is a different world. But it's still just work. Still people are solving problems and trying to create something valuable. He nodded, looking around the room with new appreciation. "Alex, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I've been thinking about what you said at Thanksgiving. About how I never really gave myself the chance to find out if I could make it in baseball." I waited, sensing this was important. "You were right. I did give up before I really tried. I let fear make the decision for me." "Dad, I'm not saying I regret the life I built. I love your mother. I'm proud of the work I've done, the family we raised. But I do regret not finding out what I was capable of." He looked directly at me. "Watching you these past months, seeing how you approached this career, how strategic and professional you've been about it, it's taught me something. Dreams aren't impractical if you have a plan. They're only impractical if you don't." That's exactly right. I don't want to be the person who talks people out of their dreams anymore. I want to be the person who helps them develop better plans. 3 months after the premiere, Netflix announced that The Prosecutor had been renewed for 2 additional seasons, making it the most successful legal drama launch in the platform's history. The show had become a cultural phenomenon, with Michael Brennan emerging as one of television's most compelling characters. The success opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Feature film opportunities, endorsement deals, offers to develop my own projects. But more importantly, it established me as a serious actor whose opinion was valued by industry professionals. I was invited to speak at my old acting school, addressing a room full of students who looked exactly like I had 3 years earlier. Talented, hungry, uncertain about whether they had what it took to make it in such a competitive industry. "The entertainment business isn't a lottery," I told them. "It's not about luck or connections or being discovered at a coffee shop. It's about developing your craft, understanding the industry, and positioning yourself to take advantage of opportunities when they arise." A student in the front row raised her hand. "But what about rejection? What about all the people who tell you to be more practical?" I thought about Derek's smug certainty that I was delusional, about my father's disappointment in my choices, about the dinner table intervention that had turned into a revelation. "The people who tell you to be practical aren't necessarily wrong," I said. "They're just measuring you by the wrong standards. Your job is to understand the standards that actually matter in your chosen field and measure yourself by those." Another student asked, "How do you deal with family pressure to give up?" "By succeeding," I said simply. "Success is the most effective response to doubt. Not because you need to prove other people wrong, but because you need to prove yourself right." After the talk, I drove back to my house in the Hollywood Hills, thinking about the journey from that Thanksgiving dinner to this moment. The transformation hadn't been just professional. It had been psychological, relational, fundamental. Was no longer the person who needed his family's approval to pursue his dreams. I was no longer carrying the weight of their fears and limitations. I was no longer defending my choices or justifying my path. I was Alex Morrison, professional actor, successful entrepreneur, someone who'd turned his dreams into a sustainable career through strategic planning and persistent effort. But more than that, I was someone who'd learned that the most important validation doesn't come from other people. It comes from the satisfaction of pursuing something meaningful and doing it well. That evening, I called my grandmother. "How are you doing, dear?" she asked. "I'm good, Grandma. Really good. I'm proud of you, Alex. Not just for succeeding, but for the way you succeeded. With dignity and hard work." "Thank you. Can I give you some advice?" "Always. Don't let success change who you are. Stay the person who remembers where he came from and who helped him get there." "I will." "And Alex?" "Yes?" "Keep dreaming. You've proven that dreams can come true if you're willing to do the work. Don't stop dreaming just because you achieved one dream." After we hung up, I sat on my back deck looking out over the city where I'd struggled and succeeded, where I'd been underestimated and eventually recognized, where I'd transformed from someone with dreams into someone living them. The lights of Los Angeles stretched endlessly in every direction, representing millions of stories, millions of dreams, millions of people trying to build something meaningful. I was one of those people. But now I was also proof that it was possible. The family who'd tried to save me from my unrealistic dreams had learned that some dreams aren't unrealistic at all. They're just bigger than the people around you can imagine, and sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to succeed so completely that they have no choice but to expand their definition of what's possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.